There's all these people online right now making snarky commentary about, we do have free speech. You don't even understand. Like, no, you don't even understand what you don't even understand because you have lived in a country that has never had free speech. So you don't even know what it is to be saying that. That's the saddest part. And you don't even know that you don't even know. That is what is so sad about this. Because that is what I am saying. This holds people's consciousness down to where they cannot even think beyond the borders of what is being prescribed. Hey guys, so I feel like I've probably made 100 videos on this, and I'm just going to keep going with it because I feel like I have to figure out a way to get across how important what I'm about to say is, because this is about to be very important in the years ahead. Very, very important. Not just to the things that are going on now, but to humanity's future. That's how important it is. And I cannot express that enough. I don't know if you guys are aware, but this year, the UK had their elections on July 4th, which, as we Americans know, obviously is the day that America declared independence from the mother country of Great Britain and the Crown. And bizarrely, here in America, we're having our presidential election on Remember the 5th of November, aka Guy Fawkes Night, aka the anniversary of the 1605 gunpowder plot to blow up the British Parliament, as featured in V for Vendetta.
Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot.
There's a very wide array of history in terms of English liberties that evolved between those two events.
I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgotten.
In the weeks following the elections over there in Britain, protests and riots have now broken out in the streets in cities across England, and there's a crackdown happening on speech there, and in particular online speech and protesting. And right now, the government has employed use of Section 127 of a 2003 Communications Act to arrest people for social media posts. And you have the director of public prosecutions even going on Sky News to warn people that even just reposting a post could get people in trouble.
Publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence.
The last point there is crucial, isn't it? Some people might be sharing simply to warn their friends, but it could be considered an offence because they're amplifying this.
Absolutely, and that's the key message, is that however you think you're acting innocently on social media, whatever platform it is, you're just sharing something for whatever reason, that could potentially be a criminal offence. And look, it's not an idle threat either, because the Crown Prosecution Service were keen to point out that they've made a number of charges.
And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth. So it's a really, really serious. People might think they're not doing anything harmful. They are, and the consequences will be visited upon them.
So it's 2024, and England still does not have free speech. And they never have, not this whole entire time. America might be the only place that has the First Amendment or anything even remotely close to it. And we've been working on our film, and part of that research has been trying to wrap our minds around the mindsets held in the past that got us here as Americans. And part of that has been some very deep, detailed history research going back to not only ancient times like ancient Greece, but a lot of research on England in the centuries leading up to America. And I came across this essay called The Falsification of English History by Thomas de Quincey, published in 1855. And I just want to say, first and foremost, this guy was apparently a Tory with a capital T. Who's been described as a champion of aristocratic privilege. So just know that going in. But in this essay, he's talking about how the British Constitution wasn't the birth of an instant, that these concepts didn't just show up during the time of the Civil War leading up to King Charles I being beheaded. as many historians, I guess at the time he wrote it, were suggesting in his view. But he then says, quote, "In particular, the doctrine of the king's personal irresponsibility, or the king can do no wrong, arose within the time period of 1640 to 1648, which he says he believes is the main pillar of their constitution, actually. And he points out that until that time, the doctrine that the king can do no wrong had not been used to protect what he's referring to as the indispensable sanctity of the king's constitutional character, but to protect the wrong that was being done. And he says, used in this way, it was a maxim of despotism fit only for a nation where law had no empire. Many of the illustrious patriots of the great parliament saw this and felt the necessity of abolishing a maxim so fatal to the just liberties of the people." So De Quincey's a massive royalist and in favor of keeping the idea that the king cannot be responsible for himself, ever. That it's only his advisors and the people around him that can be held accountable because the king himself can do no wrong. That was the belief system. And it was not considered possible under that system for the king to do wrong the way it was set up. King could not do wrong, just period ever. Can you imagine anyone, anywhere, at all, not even in a position of power, but just nothing they ever do ever can be considered wrong, and that it's just not possible? That's not a thing, okay? But it was at this time in this country, and it's really hard looking back into history for a person who lives now to wrap their minds around mindsets of people that lived 300 to 400 years ago. But especially for me as a 21st century American, I'm looking at that going, wow, people actually believed that, or at least pretended they believed that the king is just God's divine chosen representative ruler of their realm, and as such cannot do anything wrong, period, at all, ever. And there were people who didn't really believe that, but a lot of people had to pretend they did. Otherwise, it could be considered treason. And there was a wide array of disgusting punishments they would enact on people, like getting your face branded or your nose slit or your ear cut off or being hung, or they would cut people's heads off and put them on iron sticks and display them on the London Bridge as trophies of the vanquished enemies of the crown to instill fear and uphold their authority. That literally wasn't even 350 years ago in Britain, where they had a man whose job title was Keeper of the Heads. And that's what he did. He just made sure those heads were securely fastened to the iron rods and prominently displayed on the bridge there. Probably had to dust them off occasionally or whatever. That was his job, okay? He was Keeper of the Heads. That was his job. In fact, William Wallace's head was the first one they put up there, just by the way.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Oliver Cromwell ended up there eventually, too. In fact, that was still going on all the way up until, I think, 1678 is what I read, which really just isn't that long ago in terms of human history, if you think about it, okay? In terms of modern human history, that's not even 350 years ago. So, but this is a bunch of grown adults who are behind this doctrine of the king can do no wrong for whatever various reason, whether or not they're big fans of aristocratic privilege or whatever their reason is, they're behind this belief system as a form of government. I mean, think about that. Think about being alive at a time where other people around you believe that. And if you don't, if you say, hey, I think this game of make-believe has gone a little too far and is disastrous to our personal freedoms and liberties, you could get unalive real quick, right? That kind of belief being instilled and upheld and enforced in people is what enables tyranny. Whether or not it's a king, an emperor, a pope, a president, a government, whatever ruling entity is in power, that is tyranny. So I'm pointing this out because that's where the consciousness was in terms of authority in Britain in the 17th century, which led to all manner of tyranny against the people under absolute monarchs, including Charles I, who ended up getting beheaded. Then you had Oliver Cromwell come in with his Commonwealth. He swung way too hard, overcorrecting in the opposite direction. And people didn't like that either, which then led to Charles II coming back in an attempt to bring back absolute monarchy because the old line aristocracy was like, no, come back. We liked that system. But then that also sucked, which in turn led to the Glorious Revolution in the 1689 British Bill of Rights, which was 100 years before the American Revolution and the 1789 Bill of Rights. So this is all happening in a very, compacted amount of time. Lots of changes in terms of what defines government and what defines a government's relationship to the people and what defines the rights of the people. And so it seems like to me that every time we get back around to people being able to have the ability to see that the king is doing some pretty serious wrong, that is the only time when things can and have changed for the better. People have to be able to see it first, though. But that's when revolutions happen. That's when change begins. It begins in the consciousness of people having the ability to see, yes, the king can do wrong, right? If the people generally believe the king has no responsibility on earth, even to himself, let alone his subjects, because he can't do any wrong, then how can anything ever change from that, right? No change can happen when whatever wrong he is doing is going to go unacknowledged and unseen. It's only when human consciousness expands to the ability to question doctrines like this that we have a mass change in minds and hearts that ultimately forces a situation that will redistribute that unbalanced power in the figurehead back to the people from whence it actually does come. And that is one of the most important things that happened when America had its revolution from Great Britain. We defined unalienable rights. We defined that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And so we said that is the entire reason a government exists in the first place. And the only legitimate form of government then is one that is by the consent of the governed. Otherwise, it's government rape. So now it's 2024, and we are moving towards another turn of this giant wheel of this thing that is happening, okay? We're living in a world where humanity at this point has overlaid the reality we're in with a digital envelope, and that is connecting us all, regardless of where we live physically on the planet. And the two things now are becoming so enmeshed that they are inseparable. And so now we are in this augmented reality system that we now live in that's part tangible physical reality and part invisible information whirling around us all the time. And whether the majority of people fully realize it or not, we are headed towards another revolutionary period for what the future is about to look like in this new system. And it's actually been going on for a while now. And here I am in America, which is perhaps the only place on earth that actually has the First Amendment, like I said, a country which broke away from a British king's tyranny 250 years ago, coming up on, and I am watching that same country enact that same type of tyranny on its citizens in the form of narrative control to uphold its authority in the same ways that were happening 250 and 350 years ago. Like, in some ways, nothing has changed at all. You have the British government threatening people about what they share online under Section 127 of this 2003 Communications Act, which, if you look at it, is vague at best. It's some dubious moral claim they're trying to uphold. It's really not very well defined. And so in that way, it can really just be used to cover almost anything they decide they don't want people sharing online at any given time. Pretty much. I mean, they're arresting people for Facebook posts now.
Arresting you on suspicion of improper use of the electronic communications network under Section 127 of the Communications Act, okay? So you do not have to say that it may harm your defence if you don't mention one question, something which later are in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand that?
So I'm actually being arrested?
You're going to be arrested, okay?
Right.
So you got to the police station.
Right.
Okay, this is in relation to some comments that you've made on a Facebook page.
Some comments that you've made on a Facebook page.
And they're threatening people that even just reposting videos of what's happening in the streets could be amplification and incitement.
The last point there is crucial, isn't it? Some people might be sharing simply to warn their friends, but it could be considered an offence because they're amplifying this.
Absolutely, and that's the key message, is that however you think you're acting innocently on social media, whatever platform it is, you're just sharing something for whatever reason, that could potentially be a criminal offence.
And they could also be arrested for it.
And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth. So it's a really, really serious.
So I'm cutting into this edit because this whole situation is just unfolding They're arresting people now for posting incorrect information about incidents that are happening.
We have some breaking news now, and a woman has been arrested by Cheshire Police in relation to an inaccurate information on social media about the attacker in the Southport murders. It says a 55-year-old woman from near Chester was arrested earlier today, Thursday the 8th, of course, on suspicion of publishing written material to stir up racial hatred and false communications. She is currently being held in police custody.
They are sentencing people for 20 months in prison for things they've posted on Facebook.
You have been committed for sentence, having pleaded guilty to an offence of publishing written material which is threatening, abusive or insulting, intending thereby to stir up racial hatred. The sentence that I pass has been reduced by 1/3 to reflect your guilty plea. The sentence is one of 20 months imprisonment.
And while I'm seeing all this, I came across this video, which is actually from several years ago. I've never seen this before. But apparently police are encouraging people to report non-crime hate incidents. That is the phrase that they are now using.
So this is a story about Humberside Police who contacted a man called Harry Miller, I think, who had tweeted or at least retweeted and liked an offensive poem. It was a limerick, I think. The police officer phoned up and said, "We're investigating you for this limerick." And he said, "Well, have I committed a criminal offence?" And the police said, "No, this is a non-crime hate incident that we have to investigate." Now, the problem with this wouldn't be if it was just one rogue police officer who was overreaching. You know, the problem is that Humberside Police have been contacted by The Spectator, by Index on Censorship, and they've said, yes, this is our policy. So we are going to investigate non-crime if the incident is considered hateful.
Non-crime hate incidents, which is not a crime. So first of all, you have police investigating non-crimes. How is that the job of police to investigate non-crimes?
The police told me, when we said, "Why do you want me to stop tweeting?" And let's be fair, the things that I tweeted weren't really terrible. Like one tweet was I compared myself to Sarah Brightman. Without police intervention, it would escalate to hate.
But there's a whole section here in the code about why they're doing this. And they straight up say this is not something that constitutes a criminal offense, but they are gathering data on everyone.
There doesn't need to be an incident.
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be any hate. There's no requirement for evidence. All that is required is perception.
Yeah.
That is it.
So they contacted this guy because he liked what is considered an offensive limerick on social media. And he was turned in because the cops are encouraging people to turn their neighbors in.
At South Yorkshire Police, who tweeted a number of months ago, saying we were urging the public to report non-crime.
For these non-crimes online. And they're collecting data on all of these people that get turned in. They're collecting data on all of these incidents. And it says here, this data is vital for helping police to understand where they must target resources to prevent serious crimes which may later occur. So this is a pre-crime database. This leads you towards Minority Report levels of pre-crime. And to put an exclamation point on that, when the cops called this man over liking this offensive limerick, they told him they were doing so to check his thinking.
This is straight out of Orwell. You hate to use the comparison, but it is. This police officer said to this man, "We had to investigate this because we need to check you are thinking properly. We need to check your thinking." This is really dangerous stuff.
To check that he was thinking properly. So this is straight out of Orwell's 1984. Full on. This isn't sort of or kind of, or we're almost there, or this is what it'll look like in the future. This is happening now. They're actually doing this. This is why the First Amendment and free speech is so important. If the government can institute a policy of correct thinking, they can subjugate people in any way they want. That goalpost can move all over the place. And what it ultimately leads to is a people who can't think their way out of a tyrannical, corrupt system. It leads to read 1984, because that's literally what this is from. It leads to a shutting down of a person's ability to even see reality for the way that it is, and to conceive of a way out of it. It's complete subjugation. It's completely tyrannical in every possible way. Unbelievable. This is unbelievable that it's 2024 and this is the level things are at. And to prove my point, there are people who live in the UK who are posting on X right now, X, Twitter, whatever, that they do have free speech and they don't know what you're talking about because they have free speech. But what they actually have is Article 10 of the Human Rights Act of 1998. I'm going to read that to you right now just so you could see what I mean by they don't have free speech. It says, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. This article shall not prevent states from requiring the licensing of broadcasting, television, or cinema enterprises. So that's first of all. Secondly, though, it says the exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions, or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others, for preventing the disclosure of information received in confidence, or for maintaining the authority and impartiality of the judiciary. So it's like those terms and conditions that corporations have people sign. Sure, you have freedom, asterisk, big giant list of ways you don't have it. Just putting the word freedom on this does not make it freedom. Just calling something freedom doesn't mean it's freedom. That's not how this works. They don't have freedom of speech. Because that's not what this is. Okay? So there's all these people online right now making snarky commentary about, we do have free speech. You don't even understand. Like, no, you don't even understand what you don't even understand because you have lived in a country that has never had free speech. So you don't even know what it is to be saying that. That's the saddest part. And you don't even know that you don't even know. That is what is so sad about this. Because that is what I am saying. This holds people's consciousness down to where they cannot even think beyond the borders of what is being prescribed. The question is, why is the media allowed to post those things? And that's okay, but the people are not. And the only answer you could really come to is that it's an attempt at full-on Orwellian perceptional reality control. And that's what it always is when you try to clamp down on public speech. Always. That is what it has always been. That is what it will always be. That's what it is when the powers that be say you're not allowed to take a video of what's happening on your street and share that video online in what we all know is the modern digital public square to warn others around you about the things that are happening in your own environment, which is also a form of stripping people of their ability to protect themselves and their neighbors when they do that. And it's just crazy how we have all this technology, but look at how much things have not changed at all. Britain, by the way, also used to tax newspapers and require them to have official stamps. The Stamp Act being one of the principal things that led to the American Revolution when they tried to enforce that in the colonies. But these things were like licenses, basically, from the king. So the only media that could get these things had to be favorable to the government. Papers that were critical of the king or the government were not given stamps. They were therefore considered illegal and contraband. People used to move the newspapers in coffins so the government agents wouldn't find them because they wouldn't search coffins. And that continued until 1836 over there. It just feels like not a lot has changed on that score either in the digital era with the algorithmic burying of independent and citizen journalism. And now they're threatening people with arrest just for reposting a video of a riot or a protest or whatever they want to call it that they've seen online. We've gone backwards in time, or time is collapsing. It's like it might as well not have passed at all, despite all the technology we have. Oh, and on top of that, the British government's also using antisocial behavior laws, which we don't even have here in America, to disperse protests.
Breaking news now on these planned protests. Lincolnshire police say a dispersal order has been put in place for the Carlton Boulevard area in Lincoln until midday tomorrow. That's a Section 34 order covering a 500-metre radius from the Carlton Boulevard. The dispersal order comes following speculation suggesting a planned protest at an immigration lawyer services.
And I mean, it shouldn't be that shocking. It comes from a country where people like Prince Harry recently admitted they don't understand what free speech even is?
I don't want to start sort of going down the First Amendment route because that's a huge subject and one of which I don't understand because I've only been here for a short period of time. But you can find a loophole in anything, and you can capitalize or exploit what's not said rather than uphold what is said. There's so much I want to say about the First Amendment. I still don't understand it, but it is bonkers.
And of course he wouldn't, because he belongs to a system that fears free speech as a threat to its power and authority. I mean, when his dad was being coronated, they were pulling people off the street who were protesting with blank white poster boards. They didn't even have any words on it.
I was holding up a blank sign. Why are you asking for my details?
You said you're going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not my king" on a sign, and you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend?
How is that threatening to anything? And yet, obviously it was, because they went out of their way to pull people off the streets for it. Didn't even have words.
Interview. Okay, thank you.
Why are these people being arrested for protesting in a democracy?
Maybe I just haven't said this directly enough before, but let's try it this way. Not allowing citizens to share information in a digital era, because that's what we're living in, of what's happening in their own streets outside of their own front doors without legal repercussion is nothing more than this government and its media trying to enforce a monopoly on perceptional reality. But it's not just that. That's bad enough, but I'm going to explain why that's a really big problem, okay? What that monopoly ultimately does is it keeps people's consciousness in a bubble so that people can only interpret reality as is provided by the authority of that system. It infantilizes people mentally to a point where they cannot make sense of the reality around them without the government and the media telling them what to see and think. So they get used to having reality spoon-fed to them, which ultimately ensures people will not be able to think past the system in power. And thus, that system can continue to do whatever it wants, however it wants, without any real accountability at all. And by the way, what that system wants right now is apparently a wider dispersal of surveillance society via facial recognition technology and further crackdowns on online speech.
And we must have a policing response that can do the same. Shared intelligence, wider deployment of facial recognition technology, and preventative action, criminal behaviour orders to restrict their movements before they can even board a train.
So this is basically an Orwellian techno-dystopia justified under the guise that it's going to keep people safe.
Wider deployment of facial recognition technology.
That's that same ridiculous logic that we have been fighting for hundreds of years. They continue to make this promise of trading liberty for security for hundreds of years now. And has it ever been true? Has it ever been true this whole time? Ever? Even once? Anybody? Anyone?
Bueller.
They appear to still be trying to enforce some ambiguous moral code over there that makes no sense, especially when you consider the things that are being pushed and promoted these days. But this kind of thing only ever ultimately serves to disable people from seeing reality for what it actually is. Again, free speech is not just speech that is morally acceptable to everyone. That is not a thing, okay? Or speech that's friendly or nice or cuddly or whatever. That kind of speech wouldn't need protection, now would it? No one would care. But humanity will be holding itself back, especially consciousness-wise, if we're going to continue to pretend like there's some way to enforce everyone to think certain ways and not be allowed to think anything else. And there's a whole other video I could do just on that sentence I just said, but we don't have time for that today. I can't believe this is how Britain still is, and I want my fellow Americans to see what is happening over there right now, because people here in America aren't just taking free speech for granted lately. They're apparently forgetting what the First Amendment even is. There have been polls that have been done now, which suggest that only 5% of people in this country can even list off the protections that are listed in the First Amendment, all 5 of them. If you don't remember what they are, let's cover them really quickly. It's freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to peaceably assemble, so that's protesting, and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All of that is the First Amendment, and people are forgetting what that even is. And it's a problem. I think it's time for forward-thinking, liberty-minded people to start not only remembering why these rights were so important in the first place, that they were fought and died over, they dissolved a union between America and Great Britain and fought a whole war over this stuff. We need to remember why that's so important before humanity devolves backwards to a place where no one's even mentally capable of conceiving that the king could possibly be wrong, because that's where this kind of thing is headed if it continues in this way. Without these rights, which are absolutely our rights here in America, are absolutely rooted in the long history of English civil liberty going all the way back to Magna Carta, we will be trapped in a power structure where we will not even have the ability to think our way out of it or past it, no matter how tyrannical it gets. It's like the Eloi and the Morlocks in the H.G. Wells Time Machine, where they are completely mentally disarmed, right? The alarm sounds and they just wander off to be eaten unquestioningly. They can't think outside of that system. They're like infantilized children who just walk to their own doom because their consciousness has been held down. They can't even conceive of a reality where the balance of power in that environment is equal because they don't even understand those concepts, right? So it'll be just like that, basically, except with the added efficiency of computer algorithms and AI. We went around downtown Austin and we put up these posters that we made just reminding people what the First Amendment says. And I can add a link in a pinned comment below if you guys want to do that too.
Can I come be nosy? Sure. Ooh, okay, amazing.
We're trying to remind people that,
We'll keep it alive, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's delightful.
But we have to start really understanding why these rights were so important. Because whatever this augmented digital overlay future is we're heading into, humanity will be going backwards and devolving if we don't bring some of these important concepts forward, like rights that were long fought for, a very long and painful history of tyranny to get even to the point. And history is being rewritten right now because they want you to think that the entire history is all just racism and slavery and colonialism. And they just want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as if we would even be here having any of these conversations right now on this level of consciousness without having had those rights and gone through those situations and had all those things respected and moved to this point. We wouldn't be here right now having this conversation without that. Without documents like the American Bill of Rights, which was absolutely built upon a long tradition of British liberty concepts and fighting back against tyranny and things that were going on at the time, especially in the lead up to the American Revolution. So we wouldn't even be able to think at the levels of consciousness we have now without those rights having been enshrined back then. To just piss it all away and act like we can rewrite history and it doesn't matter. The only liberty people will have in the future will be through those rights. And that goes for everybody across the board. So this isn't about race or identity politics or fighting all over whatever this twinkly, shiny things are of the day that they're trying to get everyone distracted with right now. This affects everybody. That's the new revolution. And we're going to have to declare these rights again and again and again. And when we get lazy about them, that's when all the tyranny sets in. We got to do this whole loop all over again. If this was 250 years ago right now and it was 1774 and not 2024, I'd probably be writing this to you under a pseudonym in a newspaper instead of making a YouTube video about it. But here we are. We're right back here again. And the tech is different and the main story is a little bit different. It's corrupt governments with corporate partnerships now, and the town square has largely gone digital. But the tyrannies that we will have to overcome moving forward are principally the same. And it's time for people to recognize what is happening. Free speech is our First Amendment because underlying all the tenets it outlines, and let's say it again, freedom of speech, religion, press, the right to peaceably assemble and protest, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, is the right to see reality for what it is and not be blinded into obedience to what the power structure wants to make you see in order to maintain its power, especially if that power structure becomes authoritarian and corrupt and tyrannical. Without the First Amendment, you can't even get to a place where you can conceive of the other amendments and why those amendments are important without the first one. Got to have the first one. That's why it's first. Because that is your perceptual reality right there. And I believe this is why that one is under attack more than all of the others. Yes, the Second Amendment is also under attack too, for obvious reasons. But The First Amendment is first for a reason. There's a reason the Second Amendment is second and the First Amendment's first. There's an order there. And all revolutions, all of them begin in the mind first. All of them begin in the perceptual reality first. How people see themselves in relation to each other and the reality and the environment, all of that. That's where it starts, right? John Adams said the same exact thing back in the day. This is a quote. He wrote, "The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution," because it started in their mind first. All of the things that had to change to understand the concepts that needed to be understood for that whole situation to happen, happened in their minds first. Without that level of perception and understanding and consciousness, none of the other stuff would have occurred. So the only way that anything changes is when the minds of the people are capable of seeing and comprehending the tyranny of a corrupt power structure for what it is. Otherwise, we just go back to the mental state of children, and the king can do no wrong, complete with the king can do no wrong levels of tyranny, only this time it'll be in an augmented reality overlaid in a digital space. So much more efficient tyranny, I guess. And the bottom line is silencing speech is a clampdown on perceptual reality that literally keeps people's consciousness from evolving to even be able to change anything. Humanity will devolve. No matter what this future is about to be, humanity will devolve if we do not bring free speech forward.
I would like to solve the puzzle.